Marcus Chen had spent 3 months installing the Level 2 EV charger in his garage. Not because he needed to. His 2024 Tesla Model 3 had a 300-mile range that made daily charging optional, but because the act of building something with his own hands had become his meditation, his therapy, his rebellion against the suffocating order of his marriage. The charger was beautiful in its functionality. Sleek matte black, wall-mounted at precisely the right height with smart connectivity that allowed him to monitor charging from his phone. It had cost $2,400 installed, but Marcus had done most of the electrical work himself, studying YouTube videos at midnight while Karen slept upstairs in their glass and steel modern masterpiece of a home in Palo Alto. He'd pulled permits. He'd done it right. Karen hated it. Not the charger itself. She didn't think about it much until it mattered. What she hated was what it represented, Marcus's refusal to be managed. For 14 years of marriage, Karen had managed everything. The house, the calendar, the friendships, the money, even though Marcus made significantly more as a senior engineer at Apple. She'd managed his weight, his wardrobe, his mother's phone calls. She managed her image on Instagram with the careful precision of a museum curator. 312,000 followers, a lifestyle brand built on the fiction of a perfect life. And Marcus had installed a charger without asking her permission. It was Thursday evening when the real trouble began. Marcus was in the garage, running the charger through its diagnostic sequence on his phone, when he heard the Tesla pull into the driveway. Karen, home from her SoulCycle class where she'd spent 2 hours that morning, and then her lunch with the other wives of the Valley's elite tech workers. The women they called the Consortium, wives who'd turned being married to successful men into a lifestyle brand of their own. He heard her footsteps on the travertine tile, sharp and quick. Her Laubautins echoing through the minimalist space they'd designed together 3 years ago, back when designing spaces together still felt like an act of love rather than conquest. Marcus, her voice had that pitch, the one he'd learned to fear, bright, sweet, dangerous. In the garage, he called back. She appeared in the doorway, still in her workout gear, Lululemon set, designer sneakers, Apple Watch catching the afternoon light. 43 years old and she looked 35. That was another thing she managed carefully. Dermatology appointments, Pilates 3 times a week, a nutritionist on retainer. She'd created a version of herself that required constant maintenance, and she expected the same from everyone around her. Her eyes found the charger. He watched her face change, a subtle shift like a mask sliding into place. "What is that?" she asked, though she clearly knew exactly what it was. "Charger, I installed it last weekend. Took me a few weeks to coordinate the electrical." "I can see what it is." She stepped into the garage, her footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. "Why does it look like that?" "Like what?" "Like it's ugly, Marcus." She circled the charger like she was sizing up a piece of furniture she'd already decided to reject. "It's in our garage, our home, and you put this industrial thing on the wall without discussing it with me. It's functional, it's what a charger looks like." "No," Karen turned to face him, her hands on her hips. "That's what a charger looks like. We could have gotten a different one that matched the aesthetic. There are beautiful options, minimalist, elegant. You could have collaborated with me on this instead of just making decisions for the both of us." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. This was the dance they did. Karen would find a way to make his actions about his failures, his lack of consideration, his inability to think about how his choices affected her image, their image. "It's a charger, Karen. It charges cars, it's not a statement piece." "Everything in this house is a statement, Marcus. Haven't you figured that out yet?" She turned away from him, walking back toward the door. "I have a photo shoot here next month for Architectural Digest. We're featuring the home, and that," she pointed at the charger without looking at it, "is going to have to go." "It's staying." She paused at the doorway. When she turned back, her smile was perfect and awful. "We'll talk about it tonight," she said, and left him standing there in the garage with his beautiful, functional, terrible charger. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the California king bed in their meticulously designed master bedroom. White bedding, white walls, one-statement artwork of abstract black and white that Karen had paid $40,000 for at a gallery opening, and listened to Karen breathe beside him. Even her sleeping sounded controlled. The argument had been brief because arguments with Karen never lasted long. She had a system. First came the expression of disappointment. Then came the logic, presented as if it was obvious common sense that only an idiot would argue against. Finally, if Marcus pushed back, came the withdrawal of affection, not dramatic, not loud, just a slow icing over of her presence that made the house feel cold despite the California heat. Tonight it had been textbook. "I understand you're proud of it," she'd said while they ate the quinoa salad her nutritionist had approved, the one that tasted like cardboard and disappointment. "And that's sweet, but you have to think about context. You have to think about us, our image. I'm building something here, Marcus, not just a life, a brand. And part of that brand is this home. It's carefully curated. It's intentional. And a big black charger on the wall of our garage isn't intentional. It's just there. Like you didn't think about how it would make the space feel." "The space is a garage," Marcus had said quietly. "Cars go in there. It's not part of the brand tour. Guests use that bathroom." Karen had pointed to the half bath off the garage. "The Architectural Digest photographer will see it. And yes, the garage space is part of the feature. We're showing the whole home, including innovation, sustainability, forward-thinking design." "Then it's perfect." "It's not," she'd said, and that had been that. She'd finished her salad, rinsed her bowl, loaded it in the dishwasher, and gone upstairs to scroll through Instagram, leaving Marcus alone at the table. Now in the dark, Marcus understood something clearly. The charger wasn't about the charger. It was about power, about control, about whether Marcus would remain a person who made decisions or become a permanent extension of Karen's carefully managed life. He got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and went downstairs to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water from the refrigerator that cost more than most people's first cars, and looked out at the backyard, another carefully curated space. The infinity pool that reflected the lights of the bay. The outdoor kitchen that they'd never actually used together. The fire pit where they'd sat maybe twice since it was installed. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "How's my boy? Haven't heard from you. Everything good?" He didn't respond. His mother had never liked Karen, which had made everything harder and easier. Everyone's mother dislikes their wife, he'd always thought. It's natural, it doesn't mean anything. But now he was beginning to wonder if his mother had seen something he'd been too close to see. If love and submission had blended together so thoroughly that he'd forgotten where one ended and the other began. He climbed back into bed, careful again not to disturb Karen, and lay awake until the lights started changing outside their floor-to-ceiling windows. He thought about the charger. He thought about the 14 years. He thought about the moment he'd realized that his own home had become a place where he had to ask permission to exist. The next morning, Karen was already gone when he woke, an early spin class, and her side of the bed was cool. He showered, dressed, and went to the garage before heading to work. He just wanted to look at the charger, to confirm that it was still there, that he'd actually built something real. It was solid, beautiful in its purpose. He ran his hand over it, feeling the slight vibration of its standby mode under his palm. A year from now, he would wonder if he'd run his hand over it that morning as a kind of goodbye, a last touch before everything changed. Work that day was impossible. Marcus's mind kept returning to the garage, to Karen's face when she'd looked at it, to the way she'd reframed his act of creation as a personal failing. He was a senior systems architect at Apple, responsible for designing core systems that thousands of engineers depended on, and yet he couldn't design a life that made his wife happy. Or perhaps, he thought with increasing clarity, he simply couldn't design a life that existed on her terms, which was the only way she knew how to live. His colleague David noticed his distraction. "You good, man?" David asked, stopping by his desk around 3. They'd worked together for 8 years, and David was one of the few people in Marcus's life who actually knew him, the real him, not the version that came home to manage his wife's expectations. "Rough morning," Marcus said. "Karen stuff." Marcus looked up. "Is it that obvious?" "It's been obvious for years." David sat down in the chair across from Marcus's desk, uninvited but not unwelcome. "I don't talk about it because it's not my place, but man, you're not happy." "I'm happy at work." "That's sad." David said it without judgment, which somehow made it worse. "That's really sad. You should be happy at home, too." Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to say that marriages have ups and downs, that every couple has friction, that Karen was a good person even if she was difficult, that 14 years meant something even if it increasingly felt like it meant nothing. Instead, he said, "I built a charger." "What?" "For my Tesla, an EV charger. A level 2. I installed it myself. Spent 3 months learning the code, getting the permits, doing the electrical work. And Karen wants me to remove it because it doesn't match the aesthetic of the garage. David was quiet for a long moment. Does she drive the Tesla? He asked. No, she drives a Range Rover. Then she literally doesn't give a shit about whether you can charge the car. She cares about how it looks when other people are looking. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. It was such a simple observation, but it cut through all the rationalizations he'd built up over 14 years. Karen didn't care about the charger. She cared about the photo shoot, about Architectural Digest, about the consortium seeing her home in a magazine and recognizing her taste, her success, her perfection. And she was willing to erase his creation, his time, his learning, his hands-on accomplishment to maintain that image. I think my marriage might be over, Marcus said quietly. I think it might be too, David replied. That evening, Marcus came home to find Karen in the kitchen with her laptop open, showing a woman in a business suit something on the screen. The woman was the photographer from Architectural Digest, and she was nodding enthusiastically while Karen gestured around the space. This is the heart of the home, Karen was saying. Everything flows from here. The kitchen connects to the living space, the dining area, and the outdoor entertaining zone. It's all about flow and intention. The photographer looked up at Marcus with a smile. Your wife has excellent taste, she said. This is going to photograph beautifully. Thank you for having us, Karen added, her hand landing on Marcus's shoulder in a way that felt like a claim. My husband is actually an engineer at Apple, so the home incorporates a lot of smart home technology. Very cutting edge, very sustainable. Marcus watched this performance. Because that's what it was, he could see it now, a carefully choreographed performance of their life, and felt the last thread of connection he'd been clinging to snap. I need to talk to you, he said to Karen quietly. Not now, honey, her smile didn't waver. We're in the middle of something. That night after the photographer left, Marcus sat Karen down in the living room. They faced each other on the modern sofa that Karen had chosen because it was photographable, not because it was comfortable. The lighting was perfect, late golden hour coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, hitting their faces at the exact angle that would look good on film. I want you to leave the charger alone, Marcus said. We've talked about this. No, you've talked, I've listened. I want you to leave it. I want you to tell Architectural Digest that we have an EV charger in the garage and it stays. I want you to stop managing every single thing about my life. He paused, searching for the words. I want to know if you even like me, if you ever liked me, or if you just liked the idea of me, the engineer from Apple, the clean aesthetic, the status. Karen's face remained calm, but something shifted behind her eyes. The performance didn't stop, but something underneath it did. That's not fair, she said. Which part? Any of it. I love you, Marcus. I've built a life with you. I've supported you. Everything I do is for us. No, he said, and the clarity felt like light. Everything you do is for you. It's just that you've convinced yourself that what's good for your image is good for us. But it's not. It's just good for you. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For maybe the first time in this marriage, I'm being honest. Karen stood up and walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, silhouetted against the sunset, and when she turned back, her face was composed again. If you want to end this, just say so, she said quietly. I don't want to end it. I want to fix it. I want you to care about what I think and feel and want, not just about how I look on Instagram. I care about you. You care about the version of me that fits your plan. The rest of me, you're trying to sand down, reshape, make acceptable to your standards. That's not true. But it was true. They both knew it. And in that moment, standing in their perfect living room with the perfect light coming through the perfect windows, Marcus realized that Karen might never admit it. She might spend the rest of their lives telling him he was being unfair, that he was the one who didn't understand, that his perspective was wrong. And he couldn't spend the rest of his life trying to convince his wife that his own existence was valid. I'm going to talk to a lawyer, Marcus said. Not to leave you, but to protect myself, because if this doesn't change, if you don't change, I'm going to have to leave. Karen's face paled. You're not serious. I've never been more serious. She sat back down on the sofa, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw something real in her face. Fear. She was afraid of what this might mean for her image, her brand, her carefully curated life. And he realized that his threat had worked not because it made her realize she needed to change, but because it made her realize what she stood to lose. But not what she stood to lose of him. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Karen gone. Not just from the bed, she was completely gone. Her car was missing from the driveway. He called her and it went to voicemail. He texted, no response. He tried her best friend, also no answer. By noon, his lawyer called. "Your wife's attorney reached out," the lawyer said. "She's filing for divorce. She wants primary claim on the home, full custody of," the lawyer paused. "Do you have kids?" "No," Marcus said. "Thank God, no." "She's filing for an aggressive settlement. Half of everything, and she's claiming irreconcilable differences stemming from abandonment." "I didn't abandon her. I said I wanted to fix things." "You threatened to leave. She's framing it as you threatening to destroy the marriage. It's a smart move legally. It puts you on the defensive." Marcus hung up and stood in the kitchen, looking at the perfectly organized space. The appliances that had never been used, the counters that had never been cluttered, the home that had never been lived in. Then he went to the garage to look at his charger. And that's when he found the note. It was taped to the wall beside the charger, Karen's handwriting careful and precise. "You care more about this thing than about us, so enjoy it. I hope it was worth it." Marcus sat down on the cold concrete floor of the garage and cried, not because Karen was leaving, but because she still didn't understand. The charger had never been about the charger, and leaving wasn't about the charger either. It was about a man trying to exist in a marriage that had no room for him. He sat there in the garage with his beautiful, perfect, terrible charger, and waited for his next move to become clear. The divorce filing was aggressive, calculated, and completely unexpected in its specificity. Karen's attorney had done their homework. They were claiming that Marcus had verbally abused his wife, that he'd threatened her financial stability, that he'd engaged in technological surveillance through the smart home system, and that he'd become emotionally distant and controlling. Each accusation was exaggerated or outright false, but presented with enough circumstantial detail that a judge might wonder if there was smoke where there was fire. Marcus's lawyer, Patricia Chen, no relation though they joked about it, reviewed the filing in her corner office in downtown Palo Alto and shook her head. "She's going for maximum damage," Patricia said, sliding the documents across her desk. "Look at this. She's claiming he monitored her location through the home's smart system. That's not even technically possible unless she had it set up herself." "Can you prove that?" Marcus asked. "Yes, but here's the problem. Proving it requires technical testimony, which makes you look like you're arguing over nerdy details instead of the big emotional picture. Courts don't like that. They like narrative. And her narrative is, he made me afraid. Your narrative is, I installed a charger." Marcus felt the weight of it then. The fact that his entire marriage, 14 years of building a life together, of supporting Karen's career ambitions, of navigating her controlling nature with patience and compromise, could be reduced to a story about fear and control, and that no number of facts could change how a judge might hear it. "There's more," Patricia continued, pulling out another document. "She's claiming that the separation is against her will, that you initiated it through coercion, and she's saying you have a hidden offshore account to hide assets." "I don't have an offshore account. You can look at my financials." "I will, but here's what matters. She's making enough noise that even a baseless claim looks like we need to mount a defense. And defense is expensive, which I suspect is her goal. She wants you to bleed money early so that by the time this gets to trial, you're too exhausted to fight." Marcus left the lawyer's office feeling hollowed out. He'd been naive enough to think this would be clean, that two reasonable adults could untangle a marriage that had become untenable. But Karen had turned it into a war, and she'd picked her weapons carefully. He went to work that day and found himself unable to focus. David noticed and didn't ask questions. He just ordered lunch delivered, and the two of them ate in silence in the break room. "How bad?" David finally asked. "She's claiming I was controlling, that I monitored her, that I was abusive." "Were you?" "No," Marcus felt a flash of anger. "Why would you even ask that?" "Because sometimes people don't know they're being controlling until someone tells them they are. I'm not saying it's true. I'm asking if you've thought about it. I installed a charger without asking her permission and she wanted to remove it. I wanted to fix a marriage that felt broken. Those aren't acts of control. They're acts of self-preservation. Then you have nothing to worry about. But Marcus was worried, because he understood something that Patricia had alluded to. Truth didn't always win in court. Narratives won. And Karen had 14 years of being married to a man who'd compromised at every turn, who'd let her manage his life, who deferred to her judgment on everything from his career moves to his friendships to the aesthetic of his own garage. If you looked at it the right way, that could be painted as control. He'd compromised so completely that his lack of pushback could be interpreted as manipulation. He'd been so patient that his patience could be framed as calculation. It was genius, really, deeply unfair, but genius. The next week brought depositions. Marcus sat across from Karen's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Valdez who'd made a career out of taking apart men in tech divorces, and tried to answer questions that seemed designed to trap him. "Did you install the charger without your wife's knowledge?" Valdez asked. "I discussed it with her." "Before or after you installed it?" "After." "So you didn't actually ask her permission. You just informed her it was done." "It was my project. I didn't think I needed permission to build things in my own garage." "Your garage or your shared home?" "It's our home, but it's a functional object, not a decorative choice." "Your wife's deposition states that you knew she would object, but you installed it anyway as a form of control. How do you respond to that?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "That's not accurate." "You didn't know she'd object." "I knew she might not like it aesthetically. I didn't think that gave her the right to prevent me from making a practical improvement to our home." "And when she expressed her feelings about the charger, how did you respond?" Marcus had to think back. The conversation had happened almost 3 weeks ago, but it felt like it had been 3 years. "I told her I wasn't removing it." "Those were your exact words? I'm not removing it." "I said something like that, yes. Not I'll consider your thoughts or let's talk about alternatives. Just a flat refusal to negotiate." "I didn't want to negotiate about something I'd already built." "Even though it was your wife's home too." "It's a charger," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "It's a functional device, it's not a statement." "But your wife said it was a problem for her image, her brand, her upcoming magazine feature, correct?" "Yes." "And instead of trying to find a solution that worked for both of you, you refused to compromise. You insisted on having your way." "That's not what happened." "But was it?" Marcus felt the question burrow into his mind. Was he the one who'd been controlling? Had his refusal to remove the charger been an act of defiance against Karen's management, or had it been a refusal to bend to someone else's will? And was there actually a difference between those two things? Patricia had warned him about this. "Don't get defensive," she'd said. "Just answer the questions, don't elaborate, don't explain your reasoning. They're not trying to get to the truth. They're trying to create a narrative where you're the unreasonable one." But it was hard not to be defensive when your actions were being reframed through a lens that made you look like a tyrant. Karen's deposition happened 2 weeks later. Marcus wasn't supposed to be there. It was just Patricia, the court reporter, and Valdez. But Patricia called him afterward with an update. "She was good," Patricia said. "Calm, sympathetic. She talked about feeling controlled and unheard in the marriage. She didn't cry, which was smart. Judges think women who cry in their own divorce are trying to manipulate. But she made her case." "What case? That I'm a monster?" "That you're someone who makes unilateral decisions without regard for her feelings." And she had specific examples. The charger. The way you'd made career decisions without asking her input. The fact that you'd told her you wanted to talk to a lawyer without explaining why, which made her feel frightened and unsafe. "I did explain why. I said I wanted to protect myself." "Exactly, protect yourself, as opposed to trying to repair the marriage." That line played really well for her. It sounded like you'd already decided it was over. Marcus hung up the phone and sat in his apartment. He'd moved into a corporate housing unit which was temporary but was already beginning to feel permanent. He'd paid for temporary. He'd packed a bag for temporary. But temporary had a way of becoming real if you waited long enough. He thought about Karen saying those words to Rebecca Valdez. About her characterizing his desire to protect himself as evidence of his emotional distance. About the way she'd framed her need for control as his need for control. And he realized something. Karen wasn't lying exactly. She was just reframing. She believed her own narrative. She'd convinced herself that his refusal to remove the charger was the beginning of a pattern of abandonment, that his wanting to talk to a lawyer was a betrayal, not a step towards saving the marriage. In her mind, she was the victim, and he was the villain. It was brilliant in its wrongness. 3 months into the divorce, Marcus still hadn't decided what he was going to do about the house. He had half a mind to just let Karen keep it. He didn't want to fight over the place anymore. He was tired of fighting, period. But Patricia was adamant. You paid for 60% of that house. You funded the renovations. You own half of it, and if you don't fight for your share, you're setting a precedent for how the rest of this settlement will go. She'll take everything because you've already shown her you'll give in. So Marcus hired a real estate appraiser. He compiled financial records. He documented every dollar he'd put into the home, and he steeled himself for a long legal fight. That's when David texted him. Need to meet, it's about Karen. They met at a coffee shop in Los Altos, far enough from either of their homes that they wouldn't run into anyone they knew. David ordered a coffee and looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. David was always confident, always at ease. I didn't want to tell you, David said, but I think you should know I saw Karen last week. At the Fairmont, she was having lunch with her attorney. Okay, Marcus said slowly. She wasn't alone. There was a guy with them. I didn't recognize him, but David paused. They were very familiar. He had his hand on her back. She was laughing in that way she laughs when she's trying to impress someone. Marcus felt something cold move through his stomach. Are you saying? I'm not saying anything, but I'm telling you what I saw. You should probably ask your lawyer about it. Patricia's investigator found the evidence within a week. It turned out that Karen had been seeing someone for months, maybe longer. A venture capitalist named Devin Price, who was 15 years younger than her, with the kind of effortless charm that came from having never had to work hard for anything in his life. The investigator had photos, Karen and Devin at restaurants, at hotels, at the marina where he apparently kept a sailboat. In some of them, Karen looked happy in a way Marcus hadn't seen her look in years. Unguarded, genuine, almost like a different person. This changes everything, Patricia said, spreading the photos across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. She's been committing adultery while claiming she wanted to save the marriage. She's been gaslighting you about your own behavior while she's been lying to your face. Marcus looked at the photos and felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication, not sadness. Just a kind of hollow understanding that the marriage had been over long before he'd realized it. Karen had been leaving him in her mind, or had already left and simply not told him. What do we do with this? Marcus asked. We use it as leverage. In California, infidelity doesn't technically affect asset division. This is a no-fault divorce state. But it affects custody, spousal support, and it gives us ammunition to question her credibility and her characterization of you as controlling or threatening. A judge is less likely to side with someone who's been dishonest about the state of the marriage. I don't want to use it, Marcus said quietly. What? I don't want to humiliate her. I don't want to take this into court and parade this around. I just want the divorce to be over. Patricia leaned back in her chair and looked at Marcus with something like pity. Then you're going to lose, she said, because she's not going to go easy on you. She's going to fight for everything, and if you don't fight back, she's going to win. Maybe she should win, Marcus said. Maybe she deserves to. I clearly made her unhappy enough that she needed to find happiness somewhere else. That's on me. That's not how this works, and you know it. But Patricia was wrong. That's exactly how it worked. People got unhappy in marriages. They looked outside for what they weren't getting inside. They rewrote the narrative to make themselves the victim instead of the villain. And if you let them, they would take everything, your money, your dignity, your sense of self, while presenting themselves as the wronged party. Marcus walked out of Patricia's office and sat in his car in the parking lot, staring at the photos of his wife with another man. She looked beautiful, happy, free. And he understood the charger had never been about the charger. It had been about freedom, his freedom. Her need to control him so completely that she'd realized too late that she'd married a man she could never fully possess. And once she'd realized that, she'd gone looking for someone easier, someone younger, someone without the strength to say no to her. The settlement offer that came 2 weeks later was designed to break him. Karen's legal team had calculated exactly how much money Marcus would need to pay in spousal support, legal fees, and asset division to make it go away quickly. It was brutal, essentially half of everything he'd made over the past 5 years, plus permanent spousal support that wouldn't end until Karen remarried, which she never would, because permanent support with someone new would interrupt her ability to present herself as damaged by the divorce. "Don't take it," Patricia said. "Why not? You said I was going to lose anyway." "You'll lose worse if you take it. If you agree to these terms now, you're agreeing to a precedent. Any additional disputes will use these numbers as a baseline. You'll be paying her forever." "So what do I do?" "You fight. You use the Devon Price evidence. You make it clear that you're willing to take this to trial and have her affair exposed publicly. Usually, that's enough to bring the other side to a more reasonable number." Marcus went home to his corporate housing apartment and thought about the fact that he was already fighting, just in a different way. The war had begun, and he was already losing pieces of himself to it. He made a decision that night that would change everything. He called Karen directly, not her attorney, her. He hadn't spoken to her in months, and when she answered, there was surprise in her voice. "Hello," she sounded cautious, like she was picking up a call from a stranger. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Not through attorneys, we need to actually talk." "I don't think that's a good idea." "It's the only idea I have left, please." They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Palo Alto that they'd gone to sometimes in the early days of their relationship, back when it had still felt like they were building something together rather than performing for an audience. When Karen walked in, Marcus barely recognized her. It wasn't her appearance. She looked exactly as she always did, carefully maintained and put together. It was something else. She seemed smaller somehow, less real. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, sitting down across from him at a corner table. "I feel terrible. The divorce isn't my fault. You could have just accepted the settlement and made this easy." "I don't want to talk about the settlement. I want to talk about us, about what we became." Karen pulled out her phone and put it on the table. It was a habit she'd developed, the phone always visible, always accessible, in case something more important came along. "There is no us," she said. "There hasn't been for a long time." "When did it end?" Marcus asked. "Do you know? Can you point to a moment?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me, because I feel like it ended when I installed the charger, like that was the moment you decided you were done with me." Karen was quiet for a long moment. A barista called out drink orders in the background. Someone was typing on a laptop nearby. The world kept moving, indifferent to them. "It ended when I realized you were never going to become who I needed you to be," Karen finally said. "I married an engineer because I thought it meant someone logical, rational, ambitious. But you were just a man with a job. You weren't interested in building anything beyond your salary. You weren't interested in the vision I had for us. Your vision was for you, not for us. They were the same thing, or they should have been. If you'd loved me the way I loved you, they would have been. You don't love me, you love the image of me, the way I photograph next to you, the status I give you." "That's not true." "Then why Devon?" Marcus asked quietly. "Why another man? If we just had a communication problem, why did you need to find someone else?" Something flickered across Karen's face. Guilt maybe, or shame, something real. "I don't want to talk about Devon." "Of course you don't, because Devon represents the fact that you know what you did. You weren't trying to fix the marriage. You were already gone. You were just collecting leverage so that when it all fell apart, you'd be able to frame it as my fault." "You made it easy," Karen said coldly. "All I had to do was paint a picture of a controlling man and everyone believed it. Because somewhere inside, you're afraid that you are controlling. You've never trusted me to manage myself. You've never let me have the freedom to be who I wanted to be. Because who you wanted to be was someone who performed constantly. Someone who curated every moment of her life for public consumption. And I couldn't be part of that. I couldn't become that. So you left." "No," Marcus said. "You left, I just finally acknowledged it." Karen picked up her phone and stood up. "I'm done with this conversation." "Wait," Marcus reached across the table, not touching her but making her look at him. "I want you to tell me something, just one thing. Do you actually believe the things your lawyer said about me? Do you actually believe I was controlling and threatening?" Karen looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment Marcus saw it, the hesitation, the recognition. The lie she'd told so many times that she'd started to believe it, but somewhere deep, she knew it wasn't true. "I believe what I need to believe to get through this," she said quietly. And then she left, taking her phone with her, leaving Marcus alone at a corner table in a coffee shop that had once been a place of love and now was just another room where a marriage went to die. Marcus went back to his apartment and called Patricia. "I'm going to trial," he said. "I'm going to use the evidence about Devon. I'm going to fight." "Good," Patricia said. "That's the right decision." But it didn't feel like the right decision. It felt like the decision that made sense, which was different. The fight ahead would be ugly. It would drag everything out into the open. It would turn their private failure into a public spectacle. And in the end, it might win him money, but it would cost him something he couldn't calculate in numbers. It would cost him whatever was left of the belief that his marriage had meant something. The trial lasted 3 weeks. It was held in family court in San Mateo, in a small room with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that drained the color from everyone's face. Marcus sat next to Patricia, watching Karen sit across the room with her attorney, both of them in designer outfits that somehow managed to look simultaneously sympathetic and polished. Patricia called Marcus to the stand first. "Tell the court about the charger," Patricia said, her voice careful and measured. "I installed a level 2 EV charger in our garage. It was a functional improvement that I wanted to make to our home. My wife initially objected, primarily for aesthetic reasons related to an upcoming magazine feature about our home." "Did your wife ask you to remove the charger?" "Yes." "Did you refuse?" "I declined to remove it, yes." "Why?" "Because it was a reasonable addition to the home, and I felt that my preferences and my projects should be respected as much as hers were." Patricia nodded and turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we're here because my client installed a practical device in his own garage without his wife's explicit written permission. The plaintiff is characterizing this as a sign of control and emotional abuse. But this is what abuse has become in the modern age, a man refusing to erase himself completely in service of his wife's image." Karen's attorney objected, and the judge sustained it, but Patricia had made her point. The charger, when described in court with proper context, sounded exactly like what it was: a minor disagreement between two people who'd lost their ability to communicate. Then they brought out the photos of Karen and Devon. The opposing counsel tried to argue that infidelity was irrelevant in California's no-fault divorce framework, but Patricia was smart. She framed it not as asking for different asset division, but as evidence of character and credibility. "The plaintiff claims that my client's refusal to remove a charger was a sign of control and abuse. But during the exact time period she's describing his supposed emotional cruelty, she was having an extramarital affair. She was lying to her husband daily about her whereabouts, her activities, her emotional state. If anyone is guilty of control in this marriage, it's the plaintiff, who used deception and infidelity as tools to construct a narrative that would justify her dishonesty." Karen cried on the stand, real tears this time. She talked about feeling trapped, about needing an escape, about how the marriage had become suffocating. She didn't apologize for the affair, but she framed it as a symptom of a problem, not the cause of one. "I needed to feel alive again," she said, looking at Marcus, "and you were making me feel dead." And Marcus realized that was probably true. His resignation, his acceptance of her management, his slow erosion of his own agency, it had probably felt like suffocation to her. She'd married a man and gradually transformed him into an extension of herself, and then she'd blamed him for being that thing she'd created. It was almost beautiful in its tragedy. The judge's ruling came down 4 months later. The assets were split 55-45 in Marcus's favor, not because of the infidelity, but because the judge determined that Marcus had been the primary financial earner and had funded most of the home improvements. Karen received 5 years of spousal support, which would terminate if she remarried or cohabitated with another person for more than a year. The charger, inexplicably, became a footnote in the judge's decision. The judge wrote, "The evidence suggests that the charger became a symbol in this marriage of larger issues regarding communication, respect, and autonomy. While it may seem trivial to focus on such an object, it represents the core of the marital discord, two people who lost the ability to see each other's needs as valid and legitimate." Marcus read that sentence over and over, a charger as a symbol, His attempt at autonomy, her attempt at control. All of it summed up and reduced to a physical object sitting in a garage. The divorce was final on a Tuesday in November, 1 year and 3 weeks after Marcus had installed the charger. He was 37 years old. He was alone. He had kept his job, kept his friends, kept his sanity. But he had also learned something terrible about love. It could disappear slowly enough that you didn't realize it was gone until the person you'd married wasn't there anymore. He'd kept it running all this time, plugging in his Tesla regularly, watching the status lights cycle green, maintaining the device as if it was the last meaningful thing in his life. In some ways, it was. The charger had become a kind of shrine to his own stubbornness, to the moment he'd decided to stop erasing himself. But shrines to personal victories are lonely places. One Saturday morning, Marcus stood in the garage with his hands in his pockets, looking at the charger with the kind of clear-eyed assessment he'd been avoiding for months. It was beautiful, yes. Functional, yes. But it was also a remnant, a ghost of a marriage, an object that had cost him everything. He called an electrician and had it removed. It took less than an hour. The electrician simply uninstalled the hardware and capped off the electrical connection, leaving a perfect rectangular outline on the wall where the charger had been. A ghost of a ghost. "You need me to patch that wall?" the electrician asked. "No," Marcus said, "leave it." He wanted to see the space. He wanted to live with the evidence of what had been there. It seemed important, somehow, a reminder that things could be removed but not fully erased. When the electrician left, Marcus stood alone in the garage and felt something shift inside him. Not acceptance exactly, more like arrival. He'd finally come to a place he could live. He decided to move out of the corporate housing and rent a small house in Los Gatos, something modest, something without a particular aesthetic that needed maintaining. He furnished it with practical furniture and left entire walls bare. It was ugly and real, and he liked it that way. David helped him move and stayed for dinner. "You look better," David observed, eating the pizza they'd ordered instead of the quinoa salads Karen used to prepare. "I feel better, is that crazy?" "No, you look like yourself for the first time since I've known you." Marcus laughed. It was a strange laugh, a little broken, like he was relearning how. "I don't know who myself is anymore. I was married for 14 years. Before that, I was someone else. I might have to start completely over." That's not a bad thing. A lot of people go through life without getting that chance. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then David said, "Did you know that she was seeing someone else?" "No, but I think part of me knew something was wrong. I just couldn't name it." "Would it have made a difference if you'd known?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Maybe I would have left earlier. Maybe I would have fought harder to fix it. Maybe I would have done the same thing I did anyway. It's impossible to know." "Are you angry at her?" Marcus thought about that. He'd spent the last 6 months waiting for anger to arrive, the clean, clarifying anger of betrayal. But it had never really come. What he felt instead was a kind of distant sadness for the girl Karen had been before marriage made her into a curator of her own life. "No," he said, "I'm just sad for her, for me, for the two people who got married and thought love was enough." 3 months later, Marcus got a call from his lawyer. Patricia said, "I thought you should know she's getting married." Marcus wasn't surprised. Devon Price had probably proposed right around the time his divorce from his previous wife was finalized. The timelines of rich men in Silicon Valley were always perfectly arranged. When, Marcus asked. "June, it's going to be a big thing. Apparently the photo shoot for Architectural Digest has been postponed, and she's now doing the home feature with Devon's place instead. A bigger house. More impressive, more everything." "Of course she is," Marcus said. "Does it bother you?" "No," Marcus said, and meant it. "It doesn't bother me at all." After he hung up, Marcus took a walk through Los Gatos. He passed restaurants he'd never been to, bookstores he'd never entered, coffee shops where no one knew him. It was remarkable how much freedom existed in anonymity. How many lives he could have lived if he just stopped performing the one Karen had designed for him. He thought about calling Karen, congratulating her, wishing her well with Devon, being the bigger person, as people always said after divorces, as if magnanimity could heal the fundamental brokenness of a marriage. But he didn't. He let her have her new life without his benediction. A year after the divorce was finalized, Marcus found himself standing in the parking garage of Apple Park, waiting for David to arrive so they could grab lunch together. It was a Tuesday, a normal day. The kind of day that wouldn't have made it into the story of his marriage if he'd still been married, but now it felt significant because it was just his day. His time, his choice about how to spend it. David pulled up and they drove to Los Altos, to a restaurant that served actually good food that didn't require a nutritionist's approval to eat. "I heard she's pregnant," David said while they waited for their food. Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Corinne." "Yeah, with Devon's kid, due in September." Marcus set down his fork and felt something move through him, not anger or sadness, but something more complex. A recognition, maybe, that Corinne was still out there living, still creating versions of her life for public consumption, still chasing something she thought would complete her. "That's good," Marcus said finally. "She wants kids, always wanted kids. I was the one who said no. I wasn't sure I wanted to bring a child into a marriage that felt like a performance." "Do you regret that?" "Not even a little. That decision might be the smartest thing I did in that entire marriage." David grinned. "Then you know what? Maybe the whole thing wasn't a disaster. Maybe you were learning what you actually wanted." "I still don't know what I want," Marcus said, "but I know what I don't want, and that's a start." 2 years after the divorce was finalized, Marcus was promoted to a principal architect position at Apple. It came with a significant raise, more control over projects, and the kind of professional respect that he'd been working toward his entire career, but had always felt compromised by because he'd never had it at home. He took his team to dinner to celebrate, and while they were all congratulating him, he realized something. He was happy. Not the performed, managed, curated happiness that Corinne had always been chasing. Just actual happiness. The kind that exists in moments that no one is photographing, in conversations that are never posted to Instagram, in achievements that only matter because they matter to him. He started dating again. Nothing serious. He went to dinner with a woman named Stephanie who worked in marketing at Google, and they had a pleasant evening and didn't see each other again. There was a person named James at a coffee shop who gave him his number, and they texted for a while before it fizzled out. He kissed someone at a work party once, and it was nice and awkward, and he never saw them again. And it was all fine. It was all exactly how dating should be when you're still learning who you are outside of the context of being someone's husband. 3 years after the divorce, Marcus moved back to Palo Alto. Not to the glass and steel modern masterpiece of a house he'd shared with Corinne, but to a smaller Victorian home a few blocks away that needed renovation. He bought it deliberately for its imperfection. The kitchen was from the 1970s. The floors were original hardwood with scratches and wear. There were walls painted colors that clashed if you weren't careful. He started renovating it himself, learning new skills, making mistakes, fixing them, making bigger mistakes, fixing those too. And for the first time in his adult life, he was building something that was purely his. Not for an audience, not for a brand, just for the sake of building. One Saturday, while he was sanding the original hardwood floors in the living room, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Marcus Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "This is Rebecca Valdez, Corinne's attorney from the divorce. I'm calling on behalf of my client." Marcus's body went tense. "Okay. Corinne would like to apologize to you for how the divorce proceedings went, for the way she characterized you. She's asked me to reach out and see if you'd be willing to meet with her." Marcus turned off the sanding machine and stepped out of the cloud of dust he'd created. "Why?" "She's been in therapy. She's working through some things about her behavior patterns, and she wants to make amends." "I don't need an apology," Marcus said. "The divorce is behind me." "I understand, but she'd like the opportunity to give one anyway." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Corinne, about the woman she'd been when they met, younger, less constructed, more real. About the woman she'd become, the one who'd needed to manage everything and everyone around her to feel secure. About the woman she presumably was now, working through things in therapy, having a child with Devon, perhaps beginning to understand what she'd cost herself in her pursuit of perfection. "Tell her I appreciate the gesture, but no," Marcus said finally. "Tell her I hope she's happy. I mean that genuinely, but I don't need us to have a conversation about the past." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. The best thing she can do for both of us is move forward. not backward. He hung up before Rebecca Valdez could say anything else, and went back to sanding his floors. The wood was becoming smooth under his hands, revealing the original grain, bringing back what had been hidden under years of finish and wear. It felt appropriate somehow, destruction and restoration, breaking things down to see what was underneath, learning that damage doesn't have to be permanent if you're willing to do the work. 5 years after the divorce was finalized, Marcus Chen had become someone he never could have been if he'd stayed married. He had a promotion to senior principal architect. He had a beautiful Victorian home that bore the marks of his own care and labor. He had friendships that had deepened because they weren't overshadowed by a marriage that demanded all the oxygen in the room. He had a life that was genuinely his, not performed, not curated, not managed by anyone but himself. And then he got a phone call that changed everything again. It came on a Thursday morning in October. Marcus was in a meeting when his phone buzzed with a message from David. "Call me ASAP. It's about Karen." Marcus waited until the meeting was over, then stepped into a conference room and called his friend. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked. "She's sick," David said without preamble. "Karen, she's been diagnosed with cancer, stage 3 ovarian cancer. I heard it from someone at the tech community. Her mom was at an event and accidentally mentioned it." Marcus felt the ground shift under him. Is she going to be okay?" "I don't know, it's serious. She's starting treatment." Marcus hung up after David gave him what information he had. He sat in the conference room for a long time, staring at his hands, feeling something he thought he'd processed and moved past reassert itself. Connection. He was still connected to Karen, apparently, even after 5 years. Even after the divorce, the legal battles, the distance he'd put between them both geographically and emotionally. He did something he'd sworn he wouldn't do. He looked her up on Instagram. Her account was still public, still the same aesthetic of perfection. Photos of her pregnancy, her daughter, a girl named Stella, born 2 years ago, her beautiful home with Devon, the latest launch of her lifestyle brand that now included skincare products and a line of sustainable home goods. But interspersed with the curated perfection, there were new posts. Ones where she looked thinner. Ones where she was wearing a wig. At first, Marcus didn't recognize it as a wig, but then he realized. Photos from what looked like a hospital with Devon beside her, their hands clasped. And a post from 3 weeks ago. "Grateful for my family and my medical team, one day at a time. Cancer warrior stronger Tojder." The comments were full of supportive messages, hundreds of them. Women saying they were inspired by her strength, men saying how beautiful she was even in treatment, all the consortium offering thoughts and prayers. Marcus closed the app and put his phone down. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel. He'd spent 5 years not thinking about Karen unless he had to, not wishing her ill but not actively wishing her well either. She'd become a character in a story that had ended, someone who'd been important and then wasn't anymore. But cancer didn't care about narrative closure. He went home early and sat on his front porch, watching the evening light change the color of the Victorian house's exterior. He thought about calling someone. David, a therapist, even Patricia the lawyer. But instead, he did nothing. He just sat and let the information settle into his body. A month passed. Marcus didn't reach out to Karen. He didn't follow her Instagram closely. But he wasn't ignorant of her situation either. She was still a person he'd once known intimately, and even if he didn't actively look, information found him. David would mention something he'd heard. A mutual acquaintance would post something about Karen's strength during her cancer journey. It turned out that the cancer was aggressive. Her treatment plan included multiple rounds of chemotherapy, and she was experiencing the kind of devastating side effects that came with killing cancer cells: nausea, exhaustion, hair loss, hence the wigs. Devon, it seemed, was being appropriately supportive. There were photos of him at her treatment centers, holding her hand, bringing her flowers. The Instagram narrative had shifted. She was no longer the perfect curator of her own life. She was now a victim of circumstance, fighting back against an unfair disease, inspiring her followers through her struggle. It was still performed, Marcus realized, still curated. Cancer was just the new aesthetic, the new way of building meaning through visible suffering. And then 5 months into her treatment, Karen had a setback. The cancer had spread to her lymph nodes. She would need more aggressive chemotherapy, possibly surgery. The prognosis had shifted from likely to recover to uncertain. Marcus was at work when he saw the post. A photo of Karen in a hospital bed looking genuinely fragile for perhaps the first time in her life. No makeup, no wig, just Karen, bald and skeletal and real. The caption read, "I'm scared. I've always known how to be strong, how to manage, how to present myself as unbreakable, but cancer isn't something you can curate, it just is. And right now I'm terrified that the things I spent my life perfecting won't matter, that all the control I've tried to maintain is meaningless. I'm learning to surrender, and that's scarier than any disease." It was the most honest thing Marcus had ever seen Karen post. He sat at his desk and cried. Not for the marriage they'd had, but for the woman who'd spent 14 years of her life so afraid of losing control that she'd strangled everyone around her, including him. And now control was something she couldn't maintain, no matter how hard she tried. Marcus found himself doing something he thought he'd never do. He reached out to Karen directly. He sent her a message through Instagram DMs. It was short. "I saw your post. I'm sorry. If you need anything, let me know." He didn't expect a response. He figured she'd see it and delete it or pass it to her team to handle her messages. But 3 hours later, Karen responded. "I don't deserve kindness from you, but thank you for offering it." Marcus stared at that message for a long time. It felt real in a way most of Karen's communication never had. No performance, no strategy, just acknowledgement. He responded, "That's not how kindness works. You don't have to earn it. That's not how I was raised. That's not how I live." Karen's next message came quickly, like she'd been waiting for a way to say this to him. "I'm learning that now, too late, but now." "It's not too late," Marcus wrote. "You're still here." The conversation continued over the next week. Short exchanges, nothing profound, but genuine. Karen talked about her fear. Marcus listened. She talked about the irony of spending her life maintaining control only to have her body betray her completely. Marcus acknowledged the unfairness. And then one evening, Karen asked to actually talk, to video call. Marcus was hesitant, but he said yes. He called her at the time she requested, and when her face appeared on the screen, he almost didn't recognize her. The cancer had done what Marcus never could have done. It had stripped away the performance. The version of Karen on the screen was vulnerable and fragile and frightened. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Marcus replied. "I wanted to thank you for answering, for being kind. I wouldn't have blamed you if you weren't. I'm not kind because of the divorce, Karen. I'm kind because I don't want anyone to suffer. Not you, not anyone." She nodded and looked away. Her hair was gone, and she was wearing a scarf wrapped around her head. She looked like a person who had fought a battle and wasn't sure if she was winning. "I was a terrible wife," she said without preamble. "I was controlling and cruel, and I prioritized my image over your feelings. I know that now." "You were who you needed to be at that moment," Marcus said carefully. "So was I. We just needed to be different people than who we were for each other." "That's generous." "It's honest. Karen, I'm not angry anymore. I haven't been for years, but I was devastated. You devastated me, and I had to rebuild myself from that, and in rebuilding I became someone better. So in a weird way, what happened between us was the best thing that could have happened to me." Karen started to cry, quietly, with the kind of control she still maintained even in her grief. "I'm not going to get better," she said. "The doctors say the cancer is too aggressive. I have maybe a year, probably less. And I'm terrified, Marcus. I'm terrified that I'm going to die and all that's left of me is Instagram posts and a brand that doesn't mean anything." Marcus felt the weight of that confession. He understood what she was saying. She was afraid that her entire life had been meaningless, that the things she'd spent every waking moment maintaining were nothing, that she would die having never actually lived. "That's not what will remain," Marcus said gently. "Your daughter will remember you. Devin will. Your friends will. The people you touched will carry you with them, but not the brand, not the image, just the person." "What person? Who am I without the curation?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but maybe these next months are a chance to find out." They talked for another hour. They didn't solve anything. They didn't undo the marriage or heal the wounds. But something shifted, a recognition that two people who'd hurt each other could still treat each other with basic humanity. When they hung up, Marcus felt different. Not healed exactly, but completed. Like a circle had closed that he didn't know was still open. Karen died 11 months later. Marcus found out through an Instagram post from Devin, a photo of Karen at a beach, her arm around their daughter Stella, both of them smiling. The caption, "She fought until the very end. She taught me what strength actually looks like. I will carry her with me forever." The funeral was private, but there was a memorial service a month later at an upscale event space in San Francisco. Marcus wasn't sure if he should attend, but he went anyway. The room was full of people, tech industry figures, consortium members, family members, friends. All of them came to say goodbye to the version of Karen they'd known. The curator, the brand, the woman who made life look like art. Devon saw Marcus and approached him with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," Devon said, extending his hand. Marcus shook it. "I'm sorry for your loss." "She talked about you before the end," Devon said. She said you were the one person who actually knew her, the real her. She was sorry it took cancer to let her be that person." Marcus nodded. He didn't know what to say. After the service, he stood outside the building looking at the bay and thought about the charger. He'd kept the rectangular outline on his garage wall for 7 years, a ghost of a moment that had defined both of their lives. Maybe it was time to finally fix that wall, to patch it, to make it whole again. But not yet. 8 months after Karen's death, Marcus received a package at his home. It was from Devon with a note attached. "Karen's mother found this while going through her personal effects. Karen wanted you to have it. It's her journal from the last months of her life. She doesn't say this in the entries, but I know she wanted you to read it, to understand. Devon." Marcus held the journal in his hands for 3 days before opening it. When he finally did, he read about Karen's internal world, the one that no Instagram post could capture. He read about her realizing, too late, that the image she'd spent her entire life constructing had become a prison. He read about her fear, her regret, her slow understanding that the woman she'd presented to the world wasn't real, and that the real woman had been buried so deep that cancer couldn't even excavate her. But he also read something else. He read about Karen imagining a different version of her marriage, one where she'd been less afraid, more open, more willing to let Marcus be himself. She wrote about regretting the charger argument, about understanding that it hadn't really been about aesthetics at all, but about her desperate need to maintain control in a life that had already begun to slip away from her long before the cancer. In one entry, Karen wrote, "I think the thing I understand now is that love isn't about creating a perfect image of a relationship. It's about showing someone your actual self and trusting that they'll still choose you. Marcus tried to do that. He tried to show me who he was, through the charger, through wanting to not be managed, through asking me to see him. And I couldn't. I was too afraid that if I saw him clearly, I wouldn't be able to control what happened next. So I created a version of him that I could manage. And in doing that, I destroyed what we had. I hope, wherever he is now, he's living a life that's actually his. That was the only thing I ever wanted for him, even when I was incapable of letting him have it." Marcus read that passage many times. He cried. And finally, he understood that the charger had never been the problem. The charger had been a symptom. It had been Marcus's attempt to claim a small piece of his own life, and Karen's inability to let him have it had been the real failure. Not her failure, their failure. Two people who'd loved each other in the only ways they knew how, which turned out not to be compatible. He wrote a letter to Devon. "Thank you for sending the journal. Reading Karen's words was painful and necessary. I want you to know that I forgive her completely. More than that, I'm grateful to her. The divorce forced me to rebuild myself, and I'm happier now than I ever was during the marriage. I hope you and Stella will be okay. Please tell her when she's old enough to understand that her mother loved her very much." And that sometimes people fail each other not because they stop loving, but because loving is hard, and some people just aren't prepared for how hard it really is. 3 weeks later, Devon sent back a single-sentence message. Karen would have liked that version of forgiveness. She would have understood it. Marcus finally patched the wall in his garage. He hired a contractor, a young woman named Sarah who worked with him on the Victorian house renovation. She mixed the patch compound, smoothed it over the rectangular outline where the charger had been, sanded it down, and painted it to match the rest of the wall. By the time she was done, there was no evidence that anything had ever been there. Marcus walked around the garage looking at that wall, and he realized something. He wanted to remember. He wanted to keep a trace of what had happened, because the charger wasn't a failure. It was a moment of self-assertion. It was the moment he'd finally said no to someone else's definition of who he should be. He called Sarah back over the next day. "I want you to put the charger back," he said. Sarah looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You just had me remove it. I know, but I changed my mind. I want it back up, right there on that wall. Your ex-wife isn't going to see it. No, Marcus agreed, but I will, and that's who it's for. So Sarah reinstalled the charger. Marcus watched her do it, watched the installation process unfold, and felt something settle inside him. The charger had been a symbol of his struggle for autonomy, of his wife's need for control, of the moment their marriage had cracked. But it was also something simpler, a functional device that charged his car. And sometimes the most powerful acts of living are the simple, practical ones. The choices you make for yourself, without anyone's permission. The things you build, not for an audience, but because you need them to exist. 2 years after Corinne's death, Marcus started dating someone seriously. Her name was Michael, and he was a philosophy professor at Stanford. He was nothing like Corinne. He had no interest in curating anything. He had opinions that contradicted Marcus's. He said, "I don't know," more often than he said, "I'm right." He was kind in an uncalculated way. The first time Michael came to Marcus's house, they were in the garage, and Michael noticed the charger. "Why do you have an EV charger if you don't have a Tesla anymore?" Michael asked. Marcus had replaced the Tesla 3 years ago with an older Subaru that didn't need charging. "It's a long story," Marcus said. "I have time." So Marcus told him about Corinne, about the charger, about the marriage and the divorce, about the way a small object had become the place where control and freedom collided. Michael listened to the entire story without interrupting. And when Marcus was done, Michael walked over to the charger and ran his hand over it, the way Marcus had done so many times over the years. "That's beautiful," Michael said. "It's just a charger." "No, it's a monument to your own existence. You're keeping it there as a reminder that you matter, that your needs matter, that you're allowed to exist outside of someone else's design." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. "I never thought of it that way." Most people don't. Most people just move on and pretend the past didn't matter. But you kept the evidence. You kept the proof that you were here and that you were trying to be seen. That night, Marcus and Michael made love for the first time in Marcus's Victorian home, in the bed that Marcus had bought specifically because no one else had chosen it for him. And afterward, they lay in the dark and Michael asked, "Do you still think about her, your ex-wife?" "Sometimes," Marcus said. "Mostly with compassion now. She was a person who was so afraid of losing control that she couldn't actually live. And then when control was finally taken from her, she understood what she'd been missing. But by then it was too late." "Do you regret the marriage?" "No, I regret how it ended. I regret the legal battles and the cruelty we showed each other. But I don't regret the marriage itself. It taught me who I am. It taught me what I don't want. And it led me here, to this house, this life, this version of myself that I actually like." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The charger should stay." "I know." "No, I mean, it should become part of the sale. When you eventually sell this house, someone should know the story. Someone should understand that this isn't just a piece of electrical equipment. It's a declaration." Marcus had never thought about anyone else owning his home, but he understood what Michael meant. The charger had become part of the structure of the place. It had become part of the history. And maybe someday, someone else would see it and understand that it was possible to reclaim your own life, that it was never too late to stop performing someone else's vision. "Okay," Marcus said. "The charger stays for whoever comes next." They fell asleep like that. Two people who'd been hurt by love and were brave enough to try it again, in a house that held a monument to one man's refusal to disappear. 7 years after the divorce, 5 years after Corinne's death, Marcus sold the Victorian house. The new owners were a young couple, a doctor and a lawyer, both women, both trying to build a life that was authentically theirs. Marcus showed them around, and when they got to the garage, he pointed at the charger. "This isn't original to the home," he said, "but I'd like you to keep it. There's a story attached to it, and I think stories are important in houses." He told them the story, the abbreviated version, the real version, not the one he'd told himself for years where he was simply the victim. He told them about his marriage and his attempt to have a life outside of someone else's design. He told them about the woman he'd tried so hard to make happy and who had been just as lost as he was. The younger woman, the doctor, cried a little while he was talking. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," she said. "It's not romantic," Marcus said gently. "It's just human. It's about two people failing each other because they didn't know how to not fail. But it's also about surviving that failure, about learning that you're allowed to exist outside of someone else's vision. When Marcus left the house for the last time, he didn't look back. He had Michael now. He had a different home, a smaller one, an apartment they were choosing together where neither of them had unilateral control. He had a life that he'd built brick by brick, failure by failure, until it actually resembled something he wanted to live in. And somewhere in Palo Alto, a Tesla charger hung on a garage wall. It would charge new cars now. It would serve new purposes. But for Marcus, it would always be a symbol of the moment he'd finally said no. The moment he'd claimed his own existence. The moment he'd learned that sometimes love isn't about making each other happy. Sometimes it's about letting each other be free.